Welcome to a new episode of Inside the Economist's Mind. Today, we're zeroing in on something really fundamental to how Australia manages its economy, the inflation target.
hmm
We're going to unpack why Australia aims to keep annual consumer price inflation between 2 and 3%.
That specific band, yeah.
Think of it as understanding the economic engine's speed limit, why it's set where it is, how they will try to stick to it, and why it actually matters to you.
Absolutely. And our insights today, they come from the core information available on Australia's inflation target.
Great. So by the time we're done, you should have a much clearer picture of this crucial economic tool and, its impact on everyday life.
Exactly. And this target, it isn't just some random range, right? It's the result of careful thought and experience, both here and globally.
So let's get into it. The target itself.
It's about keeping the yearly increase in the consumer price index, the CPI, within that 2 to 3% sweet spot.
Okay, CPI. We hear that acronym a lot. What exactly is it telling us about prices?
Well, think of the CPI as a big shopping basket. It measures how much the prices of the goods and services typically bought by Australian households are changing over time.
Right.
And it's the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS, that independently puts this together. They track everything from, bread and milk to rent and electricity.
That's public info.
Totally public. And importantly, once those historical numbers are out, they don't get revised. That consistency makes it a really reliable benchmark for inflation.
Right. So the Reserve Bank uses this CPI figure as its main gauge. But why have a target at all? Why not just let inflation do its thing?
Well, at its core, the inflation target gives the Reserve Bank a clear destination for its monetary policy. It's like setting a clear objective everyone understands.
Accountability.
Exactly. It helps keep the central bank accountable for managing the economy. And it's interesting, Australia adopted this formal target back in the early 1990s.
Around the same time as other countries.
Yeah, many central banks globally were moving that way. Here, it's formalized in the Statement on the Conduct of Monetary Policy that's an agreement between the Reserve Bank and the government.
And that gets updated.
It does. The latest update, December 2023, actually specified aiming to get inflation back to the midpoint of that 2 to 3% range. So aiming for around 2.5%.
Okay, here's something I've always wondered.
Yeah.
Why that particular band? 2 to 3%. Why not 0? Maybe, 4 to 5.
Good question. The Reserve Bank's view, their core rationale, is that a flexible target in this range is the best path to achieving their big goals. Price stability and full employment.
Which helps everyone.
Ultimately, yeah. It contributes to the economic prosperity and welfare of Australians. They argue that keeping inflation low and, importantly, stable and predictable is fundamental for sustainable economic growth.
Okay, that makes sense conceptually. But let's talk real world. What are the actual problems? If inflation creeps above that 3%, how does that affect us?
Well, the most immediate hit is your wallet, right? Your money just doesn't buy as much. Purchasing power goes down.
Right. Things get more expensive.
And that can lead to pressure for higher wages. Businesses might then pass those costs on through higher prices, and you risk getting into a wage price spiral.
Nasty cycle.
Very. Plus, high inflation messes with decisions. People might rush to buy big-ticket items now if they think prices will shoot up later.
Pulling purchases forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It also eats away at the real return on your savings. And for businesses, there are costs too, constantly updating price lists, consumers shopping around more aggressively.
And internationally.
It can hurt competitiveness too, yeah. Makes Australian goods and services more expensive overseas.
Okay, so too high is bad. We get that. But what about the other end? What if inflation is really low, or even negative deflation where prices are falling? Surely that's good news for consumers.
It sounds good on the surface, doesn't it? Cheaper stuff.
Yeah.
But sustained low inflation, and especially deflation, can actually be quite damaging. If people expect prices to keep falling, what do? They delay buying things.
Wait for it to get even cheaper.
Precisely. So spending drops, businesses then see demand fall, they might cut back production, maybe lay off workers or reduce wages. It just creates this stagnant negative feedback loop.
And it makes it hard for businesses to adjust wages.
Yeah, that's another point. It's hard for businesses to cut real wages. That's wages adjusted for inflation if nominal wage growth is already very low or zero. Deflation makes that adjustment even harder.
Okay, so it really is a balancing act. Not too hot, not too cold. Goldilocks inflation. Sort of.
You could say that, yeah.
So how does the Reserve Bank actually use this target to, steer the ship? What are their tools?
The main tool is monetary policy, specifically influencing interest rates. The Reserve Bank is constantly looking at current inflation and, crucially, where they expect it to go and comparing that to the 2-3% target. If inflation looks like it's heading significantly above target, that might signal the economy is running too hot, overheating. If it's persistently below, it could suggest there's slack or spare capacity.
And their response?
Typically, they adjust the cash rate target. That's the key interest rate for overnight loans between banks.
Right. So if inflation's looking too high, they'd likely increase the cash rate.
Generally, yes. That's tightening monetary policy.
And how does that actually cool things down out here in the real economy?
Well, when the cash rate goes up, banks' funding costs rise. They usually pass that on. So interest rates on mortgages, business loans, credit cards, they tend to increase.
It makes borrowing more expensive.
Exactly. And that tends to dampen spending and investment. People borrow less, businesses invest less, overall demand eases, and that takes pressure off prices.
And the reverse if inflation is too low. Lower the rate.
Correct. Loosening policy to encourage borrowing and spending. But it's crucial to remember there's a lag.
It doesn't happen instantly.
Not at all. It takes time, several quarters, even a year or two, for the full effects of interest rate changes to ripple through the whole economy.
And I heard you mention they're looking more at actual inflation now, not just forecasts?
That's right. There seems to be a bit more emphasis recently on responding to the actual inflation data as it comes in, perhaps alongside the forecasts, rather than relying quite so heavily on just the predictions. It's a subtle shift.
Interesting. Now, the info also mentions temporary versus persistent inflation. How do they tell the difference, and why does it matter?
Yeah, this is really important. Think of temporary shocks. Maybe a cyclone hits banana crops, prices spike for a bit, or a global oil price surge due to some geopolitical event.
Okay, one-offs.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Whereas persistent inflation is usually driven by more fundamental, ongoing things like strong wage growth across the whole economy that keeps pushing costs up.
And the RBA treats them differently.
Generally, yes. They try to look through the temporary bumps. They won't usually hike rates just because of a short-term spike in fruit prices, for example, unless those temporary factors start to feed into people's expectations about future inflation. If everyone starts thinking, oh, inflation is taking off and it's going to stay high, then they might change their behavior demand, higher wages, spend faster, and that can make the temporary problem more persistent.
Got it. So they watch expectations closely. Okay, let's circle back to the 2 to 3% itself. Was that just, I don't know, a number pulled out of a hat in the early 90s?
No, not quite. It was quite deliberate. By the time they adopted the target, Australia had actually managed to bring inflation down into that rough zone already.
So it was achievable.
It seemed achievable, and importantly, it was considered low enough that it wouldn't significantly distort economic decisions.
Yeah.
People weren't constantly factoring high inflation into their everyday choices.
And international comparisons.
Yeah, they looked around too. Other countries with long periods of, solid economic performance often had average inflation rates a little over 2%. So this level seemed consistent with sustainable growth and job creation.
What about the arguments against it? Were there debates about maybe aiming higher or lower?
Oh, sure. There always are. A higher target, say 4%, might give the central bank more room to cut real interest rates in a downturn. But it comes with costs. More uncertainty, potentially higher costs associated with inflation itself, like those menu costs we mentioned, and the risk, it just keeps creeping up.
And aiming lower, like near zero.
Aiming really low, close to zero, also has drawbacks. It could potentially stifle growth in spending and investment. And critically, it limits how much the central bank can stimulate the economy using interest rates.
Because you can't cut rates much below zero.
Well, you hit the zero lower bound for nominal rates. It makes achieving sufficiently negative real interest rates, that's the interest rate minus inflation, much harder when inflation itself is near zero. And you need those negative real rates sometimes to really kickstart things.
Plus the wage adjustment problem you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. It makes it harder for businesses to adjust real wages downwards if needed during tough times.
There's also this fascinating point about measurement bias in the CPI. Can you explain that? Why does that mean we shouldn't aim for zero?
Right. So the CPI basket of goods and services, it's fixed for a period, right? But in reality, when the price of, say, apples goes way up, what do people do?
Buy pears instead. Or fewer apples.
Exactly. They substitute, they adjust their spending patterns. The fixed CPI basket doesn't capture that substitution perfectly or immediately. It tends to slightly overstate the true inflation rate experienced by households who are actively adjusting their budgets.
Ah, so the real cost of living increase might be a bit less than the CPI suggests.
Potentially, yes, due to this substitution bias and also how new goods or quality improvements are handled. So aiming for 2–3%, slightly above zero, builds in a kind of buffer. It means that even if measured inflation is, say, 2%, the actual underlying price level might be closer to stable.
That makes sense, like aiming slightly high on a target to account for wind drift.
That's a decent analogy, yeah.
Okay, so given all these factors, how has Australia actually done? How successful have we been at hitting this 2 to 3% target since the early 90s? What's the scorecard look like?
Broadly speaking, the track record's been pretty good since the target was formally adopted.
Early 90s.
Yeah. Headline CPI inflation has generally averaged within that 2–3% band over the long run. There have been periods above and below, of course, especially recently.
Sure. Recent volatility.
But over the sweep of time since 1993, it's mostly been in range. And just as importantly, people's expectations about future inflation have generally stayed anchored around that target.
And what about underlying inflation? Does that tell the same story?
Pretty much. Underlying inflation, which strips out some of the really volatile price movements, has also averaged around the same level, roughly 2.6%, similar to headline CPI over that 1993 to 2023 period.
And that stability matters.
Hugely. Low and stable inflation reduces uncertainty for everyone. Businesses planning investments, people making savings decisions. It's seen as a key contributor to that sustainable growth we talked about.
Can you give us a sense of the difference it made before and after the target?
Yeah, the numbers are quite stark. If you look at the period before the target, say 1976 and 1992, average annual CPI inflation was way higher, hovering around 8 or 9%.
Wow.
Yeah. Since the target came in, from 1993 to 2023, that average dropped right down to about 2.6%. Underlying inflation shows a similar dramatic fall.
So it really does seem like the target framework has been instrumental in taming inflation and providing that stability.
It certainly appears to be a major factor. It shows the value of having that clear, credible framework for monetary policy.
Okay, so just to wrap up the main points, this 2 to 3% inflation target, it's not just some number the RDA likes. It's a carefully chosen goal designed to foster stable prices, help achieve full employment, and ultimately support the economic well-being of Australians.
That's the idea, yes.
And the Reserve Bank uses its main tool, monetary policy, and the cash rate, trying to navigate the economy to keep inflation within this crucial range while looking through temporary bumps and considering lags.
Precisely. It's a constant, dynamic process of assessment and adjustment, responding to what's happening here and overseas.
Right. So considering all that complexity, the lags, the global shocks, the measurement issues,
Yeah.
what do you think are the biggest future challenges the Reserve Bank might face in keeping inflation within that target range? Especially, in a world that seems to be changing faster than ever.
That's a big question, isn't it? Definitely something to ponder.
Indeed. Well, thanks for walking us through that. Really appreciate the insights.